the chair of the committee. This is what is termed a quasi-judicial meeting, which means that members of this committee sit not as ward councillors, but as representatives of council as a whole. No decisions have been made before this meeting, and only members who have completed the mandatory training are able to vote. And I can confirm that all members present have completed that mandatory training. We've also got people here who have stated that they wish to speak on a particular planning application. We deal with applications on an area basis, and I'll introduce those people at the relevant time. Just to remind those people that your contributions should be limited to 3 minutes, and that's not necessarily 3 minutes per individual, but 3 minutes for each side, as it were. I also remind everyone to switch off your mobile phones and remind councillors that you don't enjoy parliamentary privilege, so please be aware of that when speaking. So we're on to item 1 of the agenda, which indicates that today's meeting is being filmed and live streamed on the web. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Have we got any declarations to make? No. Item 3, apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Marsham and Councillor Molydina. Any other apologies? Chair's announcements, I don't have any. Item 5 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Is it agreed that they're a correct record of the meeting, Kelly? Thank you. That's right. We're on to item 6. The first 2 reports are planning applications in respect of the city centre. The first one is item 6, Street, Queensway. I'll ask initially the officer to give us an update on that report.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is quite a lengthy update, so please bear with me all. Firstly, there's a tweak to the resolution at 9.1 to remove the words "and any planning obligation," as there is no 506. This is superfluous. Secondly, I'd like to recommend an additional requiring roof plan screening details to be submitted in writing by the local authority prior to its installation. I'd like to draw the meeting's attention to the fact that members have received correspondence, and there's been a further late objection from the applicants to the neighbouring Queensgate application, which I shall summarise now. So firstly, their letter of objection and the alternative proposal that they have for the PBSA proposal should be made fully available to the planning committee. They reiterate that their client would like both projects to be considered at the same meeting, confirms that funding is in place for the Queensgate proposed scheme and that there are no differences between the projects on delivery. Although Riverlow Group have objected, they agree with the principle of development but consider that the form of the design unnecessarily prejudices the development of their site. An illustration of potential amendments has been provided that would allow, in their opinion, both projects to advance positively and collaboratively. They also reiterate their concerns regarding the reliance of the proposed PBSA scheme's windows looking into their client's immediately adjacent site. They state that their illustrative document demonstrates that if these are used as secondary light sources and windows are introduced to the 28-29 story gable ends, then both the PBSA and Block A of the Queensgate proposal could coexist and are capable of being granted planning permission and will deliver wider public benefits. In the design put forward on Queensgate site, windows facing south-east towards the scheme are provided to articulate the building and consider secondary windows in the delivery of Block A. And finally, Riverlow note the committee report makes reference to a negative impact regarding the current proposed gap between the PBSA and the neighbouring site, and draw attention to a similar gap on the 7th Street between Queensgate and 7 House. Such gaps are appropriate in local setting and positively answer the character of the big city centre. We've had further late correspondence from the applicant, which I will also summarise. So this states that they reiterate that funding is in place to deliver the PBSA scheme. It is intended to deliver the scheme for occupation by September 25 and point to their track record, including an existing scheme down at Pebble Mill. The layout of their scheme has been guided by the experience of room types, dimensions, and orientation and mix. They reiterate the scheme accords with the development plan and will meet a demonstrated ongoing need for additional PBSA in the city. Any delay will mean that delivery for that academic year would not be possible. In addition to the delay, the changes suggested by the neighbouring scheme would mean smaller units and an inefficient layout with less rental income. This in turn would impact on the overall viability of the scheme as the funding is secured based on the current design. Delay would not guarantee that a mutually acceptable design to both scheme would be achieved, and considers that there is an amended form of development on the Queensgate site that is achievable. They point to long pre-application process they've been through and previous discussions with their neighbours, and they conclude that there is no good reason to delay determination of the application. We've also received further letters from members of the public on the Queensgate application, which is material, so I shall update you on that. So we have now received 102 letters from members of the public, one of which is a letter of objection, 101 are letters of support. In addition to the reasons for support in the report, the additional ones include these. So the Queensgate scheme I'm talking about here will help local people that are struggling to find a house, will benefit young professionals who work remotely and those wanting to buy in Birmingham from London to save on rent costs, add to the value of the city and local people as there is a shortage of homes across the UK, will aid the housing crisis, will support the affordable housing delivery, will help with homelessness and those who have big families. They're currently looking for a 3 or 4 bed house and therefore this scheme will help them. There's a need for this type of development. More housing will help younger people get onto the property ladder, and it's good to build on brownfield sites. We have also received yesterday, we received a pre-action protocol from the adjacent landowner outlining their intention to judicially review the decision should the recommendation before you carry. And this is on the basis of 4 grounds. I will summarise those. So firstly, that determining this application will predetermine the Queensgate application and that the LPA are obliged to properly consider the implications of the grant of one permission upon another. That failure to make determining this application at this point fails to make the most efficient use of land, and granting this application would run contrary to policy, and that there is a failure to provide reasoning why other material considerations indicate that such a course of action is necessary at this time. Thirdly, that there is a failure to give proper or adequate consideration to the provision of policy-compliant affordable housing. The effect of granting permission would be to sterilise a significant proportion of this adjacent site, and this would have consequences for the provision of both market and affordable housing, which is not explained or justified. And finally, that there is a failure to consider alternative design solutions. The failure to properly consider alternatives is unlawful. Due to the relationship between those 2 applications, there is a requirement for me to update you on the consultation, latest consultation responses on the adjacent development also, because it is material. And these are set out in 749 of the report, but this is an update to that section. So we've also had a updated ecology response, which for the Queensgate scheme states that the latest submission for the site is much improved in respect of the delivery of green infrastructure. There's significantly more courtyard space and a number of biodiverse roofs proposed, and the design access statement looked to be very promising in that regard. Given the current nature of that site, there is little by the way of protected species to consider beyond the potential for nesting birds in a very limited bit of scrub on the site. Therefore, an advisory note in the context would be sufficient, and that a full construction ecological management plan condition would be accepted. Recommend their standard landscape condition, which is to be modified to give further detail in that regard. We've also had a response from Historic England on the adjacent site. They've confirmed that they do not wish to offer advice in this instance and suggest the views of the city's specialist conservation architectural advisors are sought. We've also received a response from the Health and Safety Executive, who've confirmed that the information provided has satisfied them from a fire safety design perspective. Finally, we've had a response from the planning strategy team on that application, which states that the application is located in the central area where the greater need is for 2 and 3 bed properties, whilst the proposal contains a large proportion of 1 bedroom units, which is 44%. Notwithstanding this, they state the scheme will contribute to our housing supply. They note the scheme complies with the affordable housing requirement of policy TP31, but also draw attention to the public open space requirements generated by the proposals. They note that the proposal is to install solar photovoltaic panels on the roof, and that the design of the facade will exceed minimum fabric efficiency criteria for building regulations and will achieve a 31% improvement over 2013 building reg standards, Part L. And they recommend a condition to ensure those measures are implemented. Finally, amended plans have been received for the Queensgate scheme very recently, and these relate to further information and amendments to the architectural detailing, along with some additional computer-generated images.
A very full update, Nick. We now move to public speakers. I understand that in terms of objectors, we've got 2 objectors who are going to share the 3 minutes. Peter Goatley, KC, and a local resident. Can I invite you to address the committee now?
Councillors, good morning. My name is Peter Goatley. I'm King's Counsel, and I represent Riverlow, who are the adjacent landowner. Now, it's with a profound sense of regret that I'm here to address you this morning. We take no issue with the principle of the development of this site. We do take issue with what is presently configured and the unnecessary and adverse effects it has on our proposals, and which are before your council as well. Our scheme for our site benefits from funding, and it proposes 159 apartments, crucially 35% of which would be affordable. That's 55 homes. The scheme before you today is for student accommodation and makes no provision whatsoever for affordable housing. Still worse, it will needlessly compromise and in effect sterilise part of our site, with the very real potential to threaten its development and the viable delivery of affordable housing. These problems arise from considering this proposal in isolation. Leaving aside any other legal issues, it fails to make efficient use of land. That's contrary to national policy and contrary to your development plan. The 2 sites are adjacent. Dealing with one site alone, simply because the application was submitted earlier, is not some legal requirement. It does not make good planning and does not make for good or proper decision making. So we ask you in the strongest terms not to determine this application, to defer its consideration and permit the parties time to work together with your officers to bring forward schemes that do make the most efficient use of land, that do provide affordable housing and properly benefit the city. Thank you.
Good morning, Councillor. I represent the 200 household in Westside 1 and 2. So basically, we are opposite to the 20-story planning, which is less than around 50 meters away from us. Our major concern is it will blocking the sunlight because the 20-story is about 3 times higher than the nearby adjacent building. For example, the office and our Westside 1 and 2, we only have around 9 to 12-story building in that region. So another concern is because in that planning, the high-rise portion is closer to our existing resident. So ideally, I think if they put the high-rise portion further back on the opposite side of the land and also limit it to the around 10-story height, that will make more sense compared to the 20-story, put a map right next to the existing resident, which will create a big shadow on and affect our everyday lives. And compared to other high-rise in the city centre, for example, like Orient and Beetham Tower. So Orient have the high-rise, but only in a very small part of land, and it is like away from the existing residents. And it's similar for the Beetham Tower, which is like is on the edge of the land, and the nearby adjacent of it is like the road and the.
Thank you very much. And I now invite the supporters of the application. I understand they are Francis Keenan of Carter Jonas and Scott Linus KC. And again, you have between you 3 minutes.
Good morning, councillors. My name is Francis Keenan and I work for Carter Jonas. I'm the planning agent for this application. As you have read in the case officer report, this application represents a viable and deliverable scheme which will regenerate a large brownfield edge of city centre site which has lain vacant for a number of years. Our clients are proposing 540 units of purpose-built student accommodation in conjunction with the well-established student housing provider Beta Group. Beta Group are already operating within the city with a successful scheme in Pebble Mill, Edgbaston. The City of Birmingham currently has an unmet demand of 2,060 student bed spaces, and our client schemes goes a considerable way to meeting this demand. The proposed development will deliver a number of benefits for the city, including the provision of much needed student accommodation, employment opportunities, promotion of sustainable travel, green infrastructure, and £1.4 million of SIL contributions. Just to address the comments made previously, our daylight and sunlight and overshadowing assessment was updated to include the adjacent Queensgate House application approved in 2021 after concerns were raised from local residents. This report concludes that our scheme will relate well to the neighbouring residential buildings and does not have an unacceptable impact upon existing and consented residential developments. The assessment concludes that the proposed development complies with the 2022 BRE, Building Research Establishment Numerical Guidelines. In summary, our client's proposal delivers a high-quality student accommodation and will regenerate a brownfield site with no technical objections from ecology, drainage, amenity or transportation subject to conditions. Therefore, we invite members to support the case officer's recommendation of approval.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. In short, the Council can and should proceed lawfully to determine the application today and to grant planning permission. Any further delay beyond the deferment that's taken place already will effectively mean that the
minute left.
The need for student accommodation in the city, the delivery of that will be impeded because the scheme would not be able to open for the 2025-26 academic year. The officer's report properly advises on the potential for our application scheme to affect the adjacent site and whether there's sufficient concern based on what has been seen about that to justify refusing the scheme, and concluded that there is no such justification. We agree. Any point about the efficient use of land resolves to that question that's already been dealt with in the report. There's no justification for withholding the grant of permission in circumstances where it's quite normal for development on one site to influence what happens on another one coming later on the track. As to the alleged failure to consider alternatives, entirely wrong-headed in circumstances where we've shown that this scheme would not sterilise the site and could indeed allow for its beneficial regeneration. There's no obligation on us to demonstrate to you that an alternative scheme would be unacceptable or our acceptable scheme could be made more acceptable. And our correspondence indicates a very good reason why we shouldn't proceed with the alternative.
Can I invite the area planning manager to come back before I throw it open to members for questions and comments?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, speakers. So, usual for one planning application to place constraints or restrictions on how a neighbouring site can be developed. What is unusual here is obviously we have two current planning applications that are not compatible with one another. If we support one, then the other cannot be supported in its current format. That is plain and set out in the report. In this circumstance, case law dictates that a comparative analysis of the merits of the two schemes should take place, and this is set out in quite some detail within the report for you. In light of the updates that I gave and further correspondence we've received, I advise that the comparative exercise as set out in the report should be updated as follows. So I think given comments by the objectors regarding available funding for their development, I believe and officers consider that the issue of funding for the two schemes should be a neutral factor in overall decision making in their minds. Obviously draw attention to the planning strategy comments on the adjacent scheme and Historic England and health and safety. So just remind you that you've had those now. And also to say that officers are satisfied that the adjacent scheme is sufficiently progressed to make a meaningful comparative analysis. So whilst it's not at the same place in terms of the level of pre-app discussions and it's obviously been submitted after the PBSA scheme, there's enough there that it's not premature to determine this application now. I know that both developers have had a go at planning out their neighbours' schemes, and both say each other's proposals would not work for a variety of reasons. And given the lack of any technical assessment with either of the alternative schemes, I'm not able to conclusively state whether either is supportable. But plainly, the current application places constraints, but doesn't preclude development on the adjacent property. And whilst officers and members should be aware of the obligation in national policy to make efficient use of land in the NPPF, there's no obligation in the LPA to consider both applications at the same meeting. Also like to talk to the point around 35% affordable housing. Obviously, in the comparative analysis, that is a factor that could weigh very heavily with us. I think worth me pointing out that we haven't had a financial appraisal demonstrating how that will be delivered. And given that on the Queensgate scheme, there is no offer at this point for the contribution, which is required by the development plan, we have requested that appraisal, but it's not been required at this stage. It's also fair, in fact, to say that no other comparable development has been able to deliver a fully policy compliant affordable housing provision in recent times. And I think, therefore, it is right and proper for the local planning authority to be satisfied that it is deliverable via the appraisal. The fact that others haven't obviously delivered policy compliant positions shouldn't prejudice the consideration of their application. However, it is a fact that we yet to see that appraisal demonstrating how it could be delivered. I also want to make it clear that the presence of a pre-action protocol notice should not prejudice members exercising their planning judgment. And briefly, we heard from the objector talking about the impact on light. You'll see in the report it covers that issue in some detail. It draws members' attention to the BRE guidance, and the conclusions are that there's nothing unusual or unacceptable in this instance, particularly in a city centre context, and bear in mind that the width of the road between the two schemes. So just to draw all that together, the conclusion remains that comparatively the planning merits of the application before you exceed those of the current Queensgate application, and therefore approval as amended is recommended to you. Thank you.
Very much. A lot of information, not only in the reports, but placed before you this morning. Can I take any comments or questions from members? Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. There were 2 points I wanted to raise. The first is around the student accommodation. I'm still not convinced that there is a need for more student accommodation in the city centre. I believe our student needs assessment is flawed, as I've raised previously. The city is not awash with homeless students, as evident. So I don't think there is a need for further purpose-built student accommodation in the city centre. I had a lot of information and updates presented by Nick today, as well as the objectors and the applicants. But one thing that hasn't really been touched on is the heritage implications. And I'm really, really concerned about the issues that Historic England have raised in their objection, along with the other amenity societies too, and particularly the impact it's going to have on the Christadelphian Hall next door. You know, it's going to be substantially dominated by this development. And I'm really concerned that the benefits being offered do not outweigh the harm to that building and other listed buildings in the local area. And obviously we have a key regard to give to heritage in our decision making. A lot of the stuff that's listed in 8.6 could be delivered in one way or another for any development on the site. So I don't see how many of them are specific enough to this scheme to make it overcome that harm that's caused. Yes, okay, they may be smaller in scale, but I'm really concerned about the scale of this impact and the heritage implications it's going to have. And so in its current form, I'm not able to support it.
Councillor Deakin.
Thank you. I just wanted to extend my agreement with Councillor Moore's comments, as particularly around the student accommodation need. I also believe that at this moment in time, many universities, particularly in Birmingham, are complaining of reduced student numbers, particularly from other countries. So I do believe that that needs to be taken into consideration when we consider that argument as well.
Councillor Payne.
Just support the comments that are made. I mean, I think at this point, at this juncture, we simply don't know what student demand is going to be, and it could be significantly reduced. I mean, the scale of this building is absolutely massive, and I'm not sure that it's justified. And it does have an enormous impact on the surrounding heritage buildings. Simply echo the comments of Birmingham Civic Society about the design incorporating large expanses of curtain walling. It's simply too large for the area. So no, I support the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just to reiterate the points made by Councillors Moore and Deakin around the student accommodation. There doesn't seem to be the numbers coming into the universities in Birmingham at the moment, in my opinion, to justify the size of the project.
Mr. Jones.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I'm concerned about, do we need this student accommodation? If you look at government policy, they're looking to restrict visas applications for students coming from abroad. And from what Councillor Deakin has said and Councillor Moore has said, it looks like the student numbers are dropping at the local universities. So I'm not convinced that there's a need for this accommodation either. So I'm sorry, I probably will have to vote against.
Any other questions?
Chair, thank you, members. So, on the matter of student need, a needs assessment has been provided with the application. We've and the planning policy team have accepted that there is demand for this, there is a need for this, and this, it will plug that gap. And I think, obviously, we, as a council, we review that position. We talk to universities, and it's not just about the position today. This development here is planned to open in September 25. There needs to be a forecasting, and it's about the university's growth as well. It's not just about where we are today. So obviously with any forecasting, there's an element of uncertainty, particularly during the COVID era where universities reappraised exactly how they were going to teach, and the number of foreign students in particular was affected. But we've had a review of that this year, and like I say, planning strategy are satisfied that there is demand and a need for this development. So I think it would be very difficult in that context, without any counter evidence or review, to robustly defend that argument. We also had comments around heritage. The issue is covered in great depth in the report, and obviously it sets out what public benefits are and how officers feel that they outweigh the harm that's caused. And you're right in terms of, we always, no matter the level of harm, we always have to give heritage great weight in the overall balance. So just to re-emphasise that, and officers have done that, and come to the conclusion that we consider that those public benefits do outweigh that harm that's caused. And obviously we need to think about the category of the various buildings around there. So we obviously have the higher graded synagogue, some 2-star, and then the Christadelphian immediately adjoining site is locally listed. So obviously we need to have all that in mind when we make that balance in our minds. So I think that's covered the two key issues raised, Chair.
Okay, I'm going to put it to the vote, but I do think that members ought to be careful about their impressions of student numbers. I think we do have to, in this committee, go off the data that we're given. unless that data is flawed. In this case, I think the data is very strong in terms of how what demand there is in terms of student accommodation across the city. So I'm going to put the recommendation to you now.
If I may, Chair.
You've made the point previously, but I'm now going to put it to the vote. Can I see those in favour of the application? One, two, three. Sorry, no, okay, two. Okay, those against. That's rejected with 7 votes against and 2 in favour. Report will be come back to this committee with the reasons for refusal that have been outlined at this meeting. Thank you. Can we move on to item 7, which is land at former Monaco House site? Nick.
Shorter update on this. I think you'd be glad to hear. But there is
low bar, by the way.
But there is an update. So Monaco House, obviously an application has been with us for a while, and it's returned to us for redetermination, if you like. So we've had a further late objection on behalf of the owners of the Bristol Street site to the north of this scheme. And the objections that they are raising again were made against the scheme originally in 2017 and again in 2020. And they principally concern loss of light and draw attention to the fact that the adjoining premises comprise a student housing scheme providing living, accommodation and workspace, and therefore the serious lack of light resulting from the development of a 29-storey tower block opposite them will have severe impact on their health and well-being. And thirdly, that the overall impact of the scheme will have an important and significant, the overall impact the scheme will have on the important and significant heritage property. So just to talk to those, so these objections were, precise objections were presented to committee back in January 21. These objections also form part of the judicial review process that was served on the council, and was also, and then obviously was, like I say, subsequently picked up in the report back to members. The report back in front of you now, in summary, address the above issues as such. So, in terms of light and amenities, so officers are content that sufficient information is provided to reach a decision, and does recognise that there is an adverse impact on the existing student residents to the north, but on balance considers the site's location was an urban area, and the site's development context, including the need to consider optimisation of its development potential, reflects flexibility provided in the BRE guidance for urban locations and the wider development, the wider policy requirements, such as the need for sustainable brownfield development and the wider public benefits of the scheme, will collectively outweigh the impact on the existing occupiers community. As such, it is insufficient to warrant refusal of the scheme. Further to this, so BRE have updated their guidance this year, and that's been reappraised, and no material difference has been identified from previous conclusions drawn, and therefore the summary as above still stands. And then on heritage, so just to draw attention to the fact there's no harm to the no harm found to the statutory listed Wellington pub, and the low level harm to other heritage outlets. So overall, the above points were considered by the judge at the judicial review hearing and were not supported by the judge. The reason it is back before us is that the judge felt that the issue of the financial appraisal not being made public was an issue, and the requirement to make that public came in during the determination of the application. So it was a sequence of events that led us to that that conclusion. But these issues were not found to be argued.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments from members on this one? Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very much a sense of deja vu with this. It's been to committee several times. And I agree, most of the issues that have been raised have been considered already. It's far from perfect. There are things I don't like about the scheme, but it's been approved previously, and I don't see anything that warrants us changing our decision at this time. So whilst I'm not overly happy with it, I'm still willing to support it.
I'm again disappointed that they've not met the targets for affordable housing. But as this matter has been reviewed many times, sadly going to support it because I will take, as said in the report, it's the best the scheme can deliver. Thank you.
Those in favour of this report? 9 votes in favour, no votes against. That is carried with the conditions listed. Thank you. We're now on to planning applications in respect to the northwest area. And the report number 8 is land off 1 to 3 Barn Lane, Antwerp. I'm just going to give the officers time to settle in and then we'll take that report. Okay, when you're ready, Peter.
Sorry, yes.
Please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, got a number of updates to report to members on this item. So we've had a representation from Councillor Lyle, who has reiterated his objection, which is detailed in the office report. He's also requested the deferment of the application to enable the site visit to be taken place. We've also received objection from the Soho Road bid, and we've also received an objection from the inspector who's based at Summerfield Police Station. They are raising points which are already detailed within the objections in the officer report. A letter of support has been received from CLK Homes, who are the intended operator of the development, and they highlight the following. The Council City Housing's currently unpublished supported housing strategy identifies that there is now twice the number of units for single person supported accommodation than the city requires. This proposal is for a purpose-built self-contained unit, a building from conception that has had its end users at the forefront. They consider that these surplus units of accommodation are at large the vast number of converted HMO properties, the majority of which are unfit and ill-suited to the housing needs within the city. They contend that the identified surplus is a direct result of the said shared accommodation units due to the inherent difficulties, various personalities, suitability and antisocial behaviour within one household, thus owing to the number of vacant rooms and semi-occupied large properties within the city. They aim to rehouse tenants from within the city, those seeking semi-independent housing options away from shared housing within the local community, progressing to self-accountability within their units. In turn, this will release unfit HMO properties back to their original intended use as family dwellings, thereby also facilitating in meeting the greater shortage of family housing within the city. These units of supported accommodation will be operated under a community interest company working directly with the council, reducing issues that are being experienced by uncooperative landlords and meet with standards that align with the Charter for Social Housing Residents, Social Housing White Paper. Finally, the proposal would also serve as a base and community hub for the residents, meeting the needs of the residents with around-the-clock staffing. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions or comments on this report? Councillor Deakin.
Can't wait from the you made about the unpublished report. Is that right? That you said. And also the comments made by West Midlands Police around antisocial behaviour. But I also think that the bit that is local there is also and some quite opposition, particularly around, which is in line with what West Midlands Police have also said around that they strive to achieve what they are trying to achieve, and that this might be inclined to go against.
Thank you, Chair. In theory, this should be a good thing. Supported accommodation is better if it's purpose built. It has the staff and support around to support vulnerable people. That's how it should be, not converted family housing, which is exempt accommodation. And I agree with the point that this, in theory, should bring accommodation to go back to family housing. Student accommodation, bring up houses, HMOs to be converted back into family houses in Selly Oak, which I've not seen any conclusive evidence has happened. So I'm not entirely convinced that would happen if we were to agree this. So in theory, I should be supportive of this, but the fact that the police have objected is a real concern for me. The local bid have objected as well. But also there's this reference to, I think there's this combination of people they want to support, which I'm rather concerned about this idea. It's going to be ex-offenders and there's women with children as well. And I know they say they don't intend to put them together, but I'm still rather concerned because there's a lot of exempt accommodation providers who do that already. They put together a cocktail of vulnerable people together, and quite often it doesn't always go well. And I'm just rather concerned that they don't seem to have any kind of firm business model of this is who we're looking to look after. This is our focus. We'll take anyone with a bag of cash attached to it. So I'm just rather concerned that actually this isn't going to be a good provider in an area where there's already issues. And therefore I consider the representations from West Midlands Police more than I would if it was a reputable provider who were going to have a focus on what was going to be provided.
Yeah, I've got to agree with everything you said. Coming from a ward where exempt accommodation is so badly run in, private homes. I've looked up CLK homes and I agree with you. Seems to be a mixed bag of who they do and don't want to help. So I personally, at the moment, can't support it. And definitely the thing that rings to me is the police not supporting it as well. So sorry, I can't support it.
Councillor Barry?
Well, I'm broadly supportive of the whole idea. I think that we do need this sort of accommodation. Likewise, I'm not convinced that the business model kind of makes a lot of sense, but I'm supportive of that. The problem that we've got with the objection is that there's no clear basis on what the objection actually is. So they talk about crime and antisocial behaviour. Well, not the slightest evidence that that is going to get worse, and we don't really have any great detail that we can use. So I understand the concerns, but I don't. I think we have to discount that because there is no evidence there.
Thank you. Ready to vote on? Sorry,
No. Thank you, Chair. Some good discussions there. I think firstly it's important to recognise that we're assessing the use, the proposal. We're not assessing the intended operator. It's not for us to pass judgment on their business model or their suitability. We are looking at the proposal and the intended use. That's not the purpose and of the planning process. Likewise, it's not for our consideration their vetting process in terms of how it would be occupied. I think what is important is in coming to a decision, we have to consider all the relevant planning matters and apply appropriate weight accordingly. So there are sort of two sides here. We're on one side, which goes against the proposal. There are the comments from City Housing Directorate to identify that within their currently unpublished supported housing strategy, that there is a surplus of single person supported living accommodation within the city. We've also received the comments from West Midlands Police, and crime and the fear of crime is a material planning consideration. There is clear evidence that there is a high level of crime and antisocial behaviour in the wider area, and that's not uncommon within local centres as well. I think that's a fair point to make. But there is limited evidence that this particular proposal will actually make the situation worse, and the police have themselves said that it stands to be seen if residents would actually increase calls to the police. So it's very important to take that into consideration. In support of the application, we're developing a vacant brownfield site. It's in a sustainable location. It does all that it needs to do in terms of working within its context, impact on highways, impact on the street scene. It is purpose built. It's also really important to look at the situation the council is, and it's not alone in this, in terms of its 5-year housing land supply. And because of that, we have to apply, or we have to engage the tilted balance when undertaking decision making. And the situation here is officers do not feel that there is significant and demonstrable harm to outweigh the benefits that the scheme proposes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Can I put the recommendations to you that are in the report? All those in favour? 0. Those against? Abstentions. Application is refused with 8 against and 1 abstention.
Identify what the reasons were.
And a bit more into the reasons we could refuse today, and we could bring a report back.
Have you not got sufficient?
I think
I think clarity would help officers.
so. I think we've heard that the reasons for refusal that the committee are proposing is that the concern about the need, and the fear of antisocial behaviour and crime that may arise from this, albeit that we have identified that we don't have the evidence that demonstrates that the perception of that is true, and the tilted balance you've acknowledged, but doesn't overcome the fear of occur as a result of the scheme. We propose that we will write those reasons for refusal up and issue that refusal rather than bring a report back to this committee outlining those reasons.
I think that would be a more clear-cut way of dealing with it, yeah. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 9. Again, can you just give the officers a couple of minutes to adjust their positions? Item 9 is land off Dalmuir Road, Longbridge. Any updates on this one?
No, not today, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments from members on this report? Disagree.
As a comment on the affordable housing, principle that this is come forward with 5% instead of 0.5%. I know the report saying that initially
Really with this site, it's a brownfield site. It's being redeveloped, but it's not. Doesn't appear to be so difficult that 0 or 5% affordable housing is appropriate. I'd like to get some justification for that.
Other comments? Deacon.
On that line, I don't know what. I think that what will happen in my view is that it will be then rented out. The people really who was committing to
think we've made the point many times at this committee that we would wish to increase the numbers of affordable housing on each development that for us. Very often we have to make a judgment between what we expect and the possibility of a development not taking place at all. I'm sympathetic with the point he makes on this one.
Thank you, Chair. We did have a number of offers of affordable housing on the table, which included up to 15%, but they would be discount market. So actually, when we took into consideration the offers that were put on the table to us, and the need and the acute housing need for social rent and affordable rent properties in the city, and that actually the 5% offer for the social rent, affordable rent was more akin to what the city requires than 15% discount market.
5% for the 30, long way short of what they should be doing. It is a site, part of a site that's over a mile long. It's a huge redevelopment. I struggle to understand why we're letting people off when it's such a big scheme. Actually inviable to build on this site and offer something better.
We had the viability appraisal independently assessed by Lambert Smith Hampton, and they concluded in agreement with the there wasn't any money in it at all. So the offer on the table is more than actually really what the scheme can afford.
I put that before the committee. All those in favour? In favour. All those against? Any abstentions? That's carried with 5 in favour and 4 abstentions. So the application is agreed. Any other urgent business?
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware that there have been some concerns about planning consultation notices being sent out late, sometimes after the decision's been made, apparently. So just rather concerned that it's happening. Apparently a number of applications have been affected, but there's no detail as to how extensive the problem is and what the implications for those could be. Today we've heard 2 cases where we've got potential judicial review discussions taking place. Takes account of the court, I suspect you may struggle to defend that. So why has this happened and what's been done to rectify it, and why is the committee not being kept updated?
Serious concern. I think this is the first committee that's taken place since the problem became apparent. I'll bring Sarah Scannell in to give an update on it.
So we're aware of the issue. We're aware of a number of applications that have been affected by an error in IT processing. We are in the middle of actioning the things that we're doing to go back onto those applications and put things in place that get us into a position where we're secure about what we know about those applications. A briefing note is being drafted as we speak. And we're working through the details of those actions that will be presented to full council, and we'll get that in front of the committee as soon as we've got reference of that.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify, that's going to include the detail of how many applications?
How many applications and the actions that we're taking to overcome the issue.
Any other urgent business? There being no other urgent business, can we agree the necessary authority to chair and officers? Thank you. Thank you very much.